Assalamu alaikum. It is an honor to be here today and to talk about the international standards that investigators use in UNITAD for investigating international crimes and how these standards were used in the Sbaiker investigation. As my previous speaker said, international crimes happen in a very complex context, and they produce a massive volume of evidence. So the question is, how do you start an investigation of an international crime or several international crimes? So what UNITAD investigators have done is what other investigators of international crimes have done over the past decades. We look through a wide lens. We look through a wide lens that encompasses the entire international crime and its context. We don't look at a narrow lens which looks at the individual perpetrator, and I'm going to get back to this why. We actually look at contextual, crime-based, and linkage evidence of an international crime. And I'm going to explain what each and every one of them means. When it comes to contextual evidence, an international investigator would look at information that is important to establish the context of the crime. Both war crimes and crimes against humanity require contextual elements, so this needs to be determined based on the evidence. What kind of evidence is this? It's evidence of the political climate, of the security situation, of events preceding the crime, statements made by leaders of armed groups or governmental forces before, the state of hostilities, if there is one, where the front line is, the territory that is controlled by a particular armed group or governmental forces. This is the first step that an international investigator and UNITAD investigators have to look into to establish the context in which the crime took place. The next category of evidence is the crime-based evidence. This relates to the events and the actors that are involved in the scene of the crime, that are at the scene or they are near the scene of the crime. Now, given the scale of international crimes, this crime base can be extremely large, substantial geographic areas, thousands of victims. So a good investigative team, as Daphne Akça said before, will have to prioritize and will have to set certain line of inquiries to focus on the most representative of these crimes. The questions when it comes to crime-based evidence are both qualitative and quantitative. How many and what kinds of criminal acts were committed in a particular geographical area? During which time frame? How many victims were involved? Where are the crimes located? Are they spread around a particular geographical area, or are they condensed in a particular city or village? What forensic evidence is available about these crimes? What is known about the direct perpetrators? So these are issues that need to be taken in consideration just to establish the so-called crime base. What happened, when, and where. The next step, when there is already a good amount of contextual and crime-based evidence collected, is to link this evidence to perpetrators. This is the linkage evidence. Now, here we are not just talking about direct perpetrators. We are talking about the masterminds. We are talking about the planners, the organizers as well, because for international crimes, it's very important to see who planned, who organized, who gave the orders. What kind of evidence is collected in this regard? Evidence regarding the key decisions, the key orders given, the exchanges of information between the persons present at the crime and those far who may be the ones ordering or orchestrating the crime. Everything that happened before, during, and sometimes even after the crime is important to link the crime to the real perpetrator, the intellectual perpetrator. Moreover, if we have a political or a military or a paramilitary structure, It's also important to set up the chain of command. Who gave orders to whom? Who was reporting to whom? So these are all elements used for the linkage evidence. When investigators work on these types of evidence, we use a relatively low threshold, that of reasonable suspicion or reasonable grounds to believe, because it is impossible to reach a higher threshold for all this information. But once a particular case of an individual leader is elevated from this initial investigation, a higher threshold can be reached with more evidence to be collected. So how did we use these standards in the Sbaiker investigation? The Sbaiker investigation is now at a very advanced stage. A report is coming out very soon. And I'm just going to tell you the kind of questions we looked at in our investigation. For contextual evidence, we looked at the emergence of ISIL and its ideology against the Shia, how it evolved. Did it change over the years or not? How their attacks reflected the ideology against the Shia. We also looked into how ISIL advanced into the territory of Iraq, how it reached Mosul, how it prepared to enter Tikrit, and the temporary breakdown of defense. For the crime-based evidence, we looked at who was involved. Was it ISIL? Were there other actors involved? How many civilians were there? Were there governmental forces involved? The context itself of the crime. And then we looked into the complete narrative of how the events unfolded, how ISIL entered into Tikrit, how it took control of Tikrit, how the soldiers and the volunteers left the Tikrit Air Academy, how they were intercepted on the way by ISIL, where were they intercepted, how they were transferred, some of them to the presidential palace complex while others were taken elsewhere, which killing zones were active in the presidential palace complex, what other places of disappearance or execution could we find. We also looked at specific questions when it comes to the crime base. How many ISIL members orchestrated this crime? How many victims? Can we look at the victims as soldiers, or can we look at them as civilians because they bore no weapons and they wore civilian clothing? This is very important for the crimes of war crime and crimes against humanity. What kind of acts were committed? We're focusing on the killings, but actually other crimes were committed as well. They were beaten, they were detained, and their personal items were misappropriated. This is also good to record as a crime. And then we went to the linkage evidence, the highest level of evidence linking the perpetrators to the crime. We didn't focus only on the direct perpetrators because the Iraqi judiciary has done that already, has prosecuted and sentenced many of these perpetrators. We were looking for the man with the plan or the group with the plan. Who planned the takeover of Tikrit? How many groups entered Tikrit? Who were their leaders? Who gave the orders to intercept the cadets and the volunteers marching on the Baghdad-Mosul highway? When was that order given? Where were the details? Very specifically, the separation of Sunnis from Shias, was that an ad hoc, inconsistent act of various ISIL members, or was that an orchestrated, coordinated activity based on an order of a high-ranking person? How did the order to kill the Shias in the presidential palace complex come to be? Who led which group of perpetrators therein? We also looked at the command and control structure of ISIL present at the time to figure out who was ordering who. This was also important to see, was there an overarching reason for their killing? Or was it something for personal motives? Were they killed because they were soldiers and they represented a threat, or were they killed because they were Shia? And if they were killed because they were Shia, were they killed because to punish them, or to threaten them, or to weaken them, or to annihilate the Shias as a group? These are the kind of questions we looked into it with the wide lens that I mentioned in the beginning. And as I said, it is very important to have a narrow lens as well, and we relied heavily on the work of the Iraqi judiciary in prosecuting and sentencing individual perpetrators. But the added value of UNITAD, as Judge Qasim put it, is that we put the pieces of the puzzle together. We have a wide lens which encompasses these different types of evidence in order to reach findings of international crimes. Thank you very much.